This presentation on resetting attitudes to safety, incorporating safety too, is given in the construct of the Australia-New Zealand College of Perfusion Improvement Reporting Scheme, and covers off Safety 1 and Safety 2 theory and aspects of perfusion incident reporting. The only disclosures are shown on this slide, and I would like to acknowledge Professor Eric Holnagel and Dr. Carl Horsley for providing content for this presentation. Well, what is safety? In essence, it's commonly thought as a system where as little as possible goes wrong, and the focus is actually getting rid of the bad stuff, reducing the bad events to a minimum. And if you Google safety in healthcare or safety in perfusion, all of the hits that you get primarily revolve around reducing error and eliminating bad events. So safety 1 is a situation where nothing goes wrong in an ideal environment. And interestingly, it is actually defined by its opposite. It's defined by a lack of safety because we measure error, we measure things that go wrong. And we respond to these things that are deemed unacceptable. And in a safety 1 environment, humans are actually seen as a weak link, as a liability. And what we do is we set about trying to investigate these things that go wrong with root cause analyses and other mechanisms of investigation to find the cause of the problem and hopefully fix it. So the ultimate objective is to do no harm. Well, this is James Reason's well-known and well-described Swiss cheese theory of accident trajectories. And here in this paper, he has applied it with colleagues to cardiac surgery and human factors. And we can see these latent failures that are related to organizational system issues that predispose a situation to error, that lie behind the active failures at the sharp end, which we as perfusionists see, but are a very small percentage of the total things that can go wrong, and almost always related to something that lies behind them in terms of the latent failures waiting to happen. So if we're managing safety in a safety 1 environment, we're managing it by snapshots. We can see the grey squiggly lines represent performance variation, both positive and negative, but by and large above a limit of acceptable or a limit of unacceptable performance. Now occasionally performance drops below that limit of unacceptable performance, and that is when we see these harmful effects, these incidents and errors that we measure and count and try and correct. And the incidence or the frequency of these events in healthcare and in perfusion specifically are probably adverse events in the order of between 1 and 2 per 1,000. So they're very infrequent, the thin red line on the pie graph. But when they occur, they're very obvious, and we see them standing out disproportionately. So we capture these events and incidents in reporting systems, and these may be mandatory or voluntary as recommended by the Institute of Health in this publication in 2000 is human. And these incidents and serious adverse events are published variably, and we can see in the green histograms from the District Health Boards of New Zealand, the frequency of serious adverse events increasing over time. But in fact, the actual value of these numbers in terms of total adverse events is not particularly helpful. It doesn't tell us a lot, and in fact, the increasing frequency of these may simply be due, and quite likely due, to an increased preponderance to report. And often they simply generate bad press, but don't give us much more. What we do know about reporting systems, incident reporting systems, is that they markedly underestimate the real frequency of adverse events and incidents as they happen. And this report to the Officer of the Inspector General in the US estimated that they were only capturing 86% of incidents that occurred in their hospitals. This was in 2008. And we know from our experience with the Perfusion improvement reporting system that the reporting of these incidents underestimates their actual occurrence. This report by Mitchell and colleagues looked at incident reporting 15 years after the publication of To Err is Human by the Institute of Medicine, and described why the expectations of that publication had not been met. And as you can see, bullet pointed on the slide, it was due to things like poor processing of the reports themselves, not seeing subsequent actions as a result of the report, the fact that people didn't engage, in this case doctors, although nurses were found to engage far more readily in terms of reporting systems, and quite typically underfunding and technology issues. In August of 2019, we surveyed 198 perfusionists who subscribed to PERS list. Now, this is a group, an email group, who receive by subscription the reports from the incident perfusion system as they are published. So they're an engaged group in terms of incident reporting. And we looked at the responses as a percentage of the number of respondents, and we also grouped them by region, both within Australia and New Zealand and beyond. And again, we found that the barriers to reporting were consistent with what is in the published literature. And quite interestingly, unit culture was the greatest barrier that we discovered. And discovery, or fear of discovery, also put people off reporting. And this was quite a commonly reported barrier even from New Zealand respondents, notwithstanding there is a no-faults system in New Zealand with the Accident Compensation Act. So in essence, you cannot be sued. And these data are published in this paper, which is available elsewhere on the Perfusion safety pages of the Australia-New Zealand College. We found that, and not surprisingly, this was an engaged group, that respondents were by and large likely or very likely to report incidents as they occurred, quite commonly across regions as well. However, when we actually asked who had submitted in the last 12 months, we found significant variation to the perception that these respondents were very likely to report. And we see overall only 22% of this engaged group had submitted a report to PERS. Now, one might argue that this reflects a very safe environment and no errors or incidents or near misses occurring, but that is extremely unlikely. And this underreporting, again, is consistent with what we have previously discussed. We looked at incident reporting a little while ago at the Australia-New Zealand Collaborative Perfusion Registry, and a very small percentage of cases had associated incidents ascribed to them, and of that small percentage, only 38% went on to be reported to the voluntary reporting system that we have on the college website. One of the primary reasons for not reporting near-miss occurrences is this fix and forget phenomenon. And so something goes slightly wrong during a procedure, and this is fixed without any patient impact. And so subsequently, we forget about it because it's out of sight and out of mind. So we now come to the emergence of safety 2. Professor Eric Holnagel is the world expert on it, and this book, Safety 1 and Safety 2, by the professor, is essential reading for perfusion students, and in fact for all perfusionists and anyone in healthcare. So in Safety 2, this is a system where as many things as possible go right, as opposed to measuring things that go wrong. A somewhat different concept. And we can see that humans are seen as a resource in a Safety 2 environment because we are very flexible and we have the ability to make adjustments to counteract variations in performance, and especially minor negative performance, and build resilience into the system by fixing a particular problem before it is exacerbated to something that is serious. And so if we investigate things in Safety 2, we want to look at things that go right, a slightly more difficult concept to understand than things that go wrong. Because all of the things that go right are not clearly obvious to us. We're not taking any notice of them simply because they are going right. However, they are the majority of what we do in terms of performance activities. As we can see, they represent the green portion of the graph. Safety 2 is described as safety as a dynamic non-event, an unusual concept. So if we look at the green performance variations, positive and negative, they are by nature dynamic. They're moving all over the place. There are lots of interactions that are occurring. They're a non-event because they go unnoticed, as we might expect. And they represent work as done, as opposed to work as imagined or prescribed, which is set out in hospital systems such as recommended best practices and policies. And these two concepts don't always align, and what we need to do is to more closely align work as done with work as imagined. In the second part of these two talks on safety theory and incident reporting and perfusion, we will look at the integration of Safety 2 concepts into perfusion practice and also into incident reporting.